This podcast explores Europe through evidence, experience, and honest dialogue. Not to defend, not to attack, but really to understand. Not just aiming for an industrial renaissance, no, we aim for a renaissance. Turning today's crises, competition, and lost ground into tomorrow's European industrial greatness. Rebirth with grit, competitiveness with soul. Today, I have the honor of having two established guests. The first one is Philippe Gijsels. Philippe Gijsels is Chief Strategy Officer at BNP Paribas, Fortis, and one of Belgium's most respected market strategists. He is known for translating complex macroeconomic shifts into clear insights for investors and business leaders. He is the co-author of the recent book, The New World Economy in 5 Trends, which explores the structural forces reshaping markets from inflation and innovation to climate transition. Welcome, Philippe.
Thank you, Brecht, for the opportunity.
My second guest is Bruno Colmant. Bruno Colmant is a Belgian economist, author, and member of the Royal Academy of Belgium. With a career spanning academia, finance, and public debate, he has held senior roles at institutions such as ING, Ageas, and the Groof Peterkam. And he has written more than 90 books, and he told me 95 to be precisely. So his latest book, Changement de Care, reflects on the deep economic and societal transformations shaping the coming decades. Welcome, Bruno.
Thank you.
I want to start really on a personal note, with everything which is happening right now. How are you personally feeling as a European citizen about what is happening with Europe and on this geopolitical stage?
Well, to be honest with you, I think I'm kind of worried about what's happening with Europe because we see multiple threats. First, the links with the USA is dismantled. We are threatened by Russia. And we see that, economically speaking, we will be overwhelmed by Chinese exports. So we are weakened by this situation. And I think that there will be some need for a reshuffling of the European governance. I think the way Europe works today is not anymore efficient to face the challenges of tomorrow, including the way Europe is being managed by the European Commission. So I think that the time has come to rethink Europe, departing from a model that was created almost 50 years ago. So something has to change.
Philippe, same question for you.
Yeah, first I would like to say I'm very happy for the invitation and very happy to be with Bruno because we've crossed each other in virtual worlds, but I think this is the first time we really have the opportunity to talk. I agree with what Bruno says. You probably, if you look at the world, you should be worried. In our book, we write about a fourth turning. This is clearly a fourth turning in the sense that the moment that you need to come together most, it's not there. So, but that's typical for the time frame that we have. I indeed think a new model is needed, but that's also something typical you build at the end of a fourth turning, the beginning of a first turning once again. So I would say I'm worried. You cannot be anything else than worried when you look at this. But still, I would also say hopeful that somehow for kids and then grandchildren and on, we find a way to make this work. And I think, and we will talk extensively about this going in this podcast. I think all the building blocks are on the table, but we should be able to reorganize them in a way that works for us, I think.
Are you worried? Are you rather neutral, negative, or positive? What is really your sentiments?
I'm worried. You know, I have a daughter, she's 25, and I would have said that I was very pleased to discuss with Philippe. I'm a daughter, she's 25, she's a European citizen. She's very happy to live in our times. But I think that the future we are preparing for the younger generation is not as bright as what we could have done. So the world is full of debt, full of climate debt, and hopefully a moment will come to crystallize all these events, to reshuffle the society, and also to give our children, the definition of a new future. What will be the social contract for the future? What will be important, less important? How do we want to build up solidarity among people? How do we want to build up maybe a new economic model? factoring in climate issues. So we have to define something, to reshuffle something, and we are still living with the old thoughts of the world of yesterday.
Worried, positive, neutral?
Well, I would lean towards the positive side, but there is a lot of work to do. And then, okay, social contract is a very, very interesting concept because social contract is defined differently in Europe than in the US. In Europe, when you have a social contract, you give all the powers to the state, also to the maybe supranational state, which is Europe in a way. And when it's done, it's done. In the United States, it's more like a permanent thing, but I follow the logic of Bruno, and you've written about it extensively, of course. We have one book, and we have 95, so I'm a little bit humbled by that. But the point is, maybe a new social contract is necessary with the younger generation. And my kids are 22 and 25. It's more or less the same age. They inherited the mess probably that we made. We should probably help them the best way we can, but eventually, and that's my hope, and therefore I hope lean more to the hope side. I hope that they will be able to build this new world, this new social contracts, and like I said, all the building blocks are clearly on the table, but we have to find a way to make them work.
Europe has been established as a peace project. It has been established also to be focused on the internal market, on global trade. Fast forward to today. Is Europe politically an unfinished project? Is it still fit for purpose, knowing that some key decisions need to be made quite rapidly? I know, Bruno, you've written a lot about this. So how are you looking at this currently?
Well, one has to recognize that Europe was created to achieve peace in Europe. And originally there were 6 countries, including enemy countries like Germany and Italy. So that was a huge success and still is a huge success. And we shouldn't forget that 25 years ago, we created the euro, the common currency, which was quite an accomplishment because joining different countries with one currency was quite a challenge. Today, I would say that probably Europe expanded too fast and didn't take enough time to integrate countries that used to be former USSR countries. And it's probably unfinished because the struggle will be between one common Europe, the same for everybody, whereas some countries are claiming more independence, more sovereignty, like Hungary, like Czechia, like Slovakia, like maybe Italy one day. And the political landscape has changed. We will see probably nationalist parties emerging in the coming years, like in Germany and France. And so the trick will be to know where we will position Europe. Are we going to stick to a federal model? Or are we going with unanimity rules for multiple decisions? Or are we going to allow, to some extent, more freedom for individual countries in a kind of more confederal way? And I think the second route is probably the best one because trying to find homogeneity with countries disagreeing with Europe will create multiple hurdles.
From a market's point of view as well, I can imagine that international markets are looking at Europe like, okay, Europe is a conglomerate of countries. Do you see also that fragmentation from the perspective of non-Europeans in the market sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of things to unpack here. So first of all, let's maybe look from an historical point of view how we got here. And like we mentioned in our book, this is a fourth turning. And a fourth turning is a book that was written already 20, 30 years ago by Neil Howe and Mr. Strauss. And now there's an update. The fourth turning is here by Neil Howe. And that's what we always try to when we talk to our clients, to explain that we've been here before. Because sometimes you have your own history, but sometimes your own personal history does not go far enough. So then you have to start to dig into history books. And then Neil Howe is an historian who explains this fourth turning thing very well. And the point is that a lot of things that seem to be happening around us with Europe, but the world in general, seem to be extremely random. But if you look at it, what's a fourth turning? Well, a fourth turning is a period of very big geopolitical uncertainties, worries, unfortunately wars, civil center that gets smaller and smaller and weaker, and it's no that you should take. But if politicians try to do that on a national level, but also on European level, you push the voters even more to the extremes. It's also a period, and you should read the book. It's 400-500 pages. There are also quite a bit nice podcasts about it. It's also a period where sitting presidents, sitting governments, sitting parties typically lose the elections. So that's the world you're in. And the last fourth turning, and I'm not predicting World War III here, was the Second World War. The one before that was the American Civil War. And then you go back to the War of the Roses, the Glorious Revolution, the Armada crisis back in the United Kingdom, because the United States did not exist by then. And there is each and every time 80 years between that. Mm-hmm. And the point is that after the Second World War, you say, there's so much horror, there is so much death, we're never going to do that again. And then you build Europe, and you build NATO, and you build later on climate agreements and trade agreements. So you build that world. And typically, and what happens after 80 years, unfortunately, all the people who lived through the horror are dead or very old aged. People forget, and you start again. So if you look through those glasses to the world, but with that view, you realize that what Trump is doing is also very logical for a fourth term. You destroy the previous structure of the world. You try to get rid of NATO, you try to get rid of Europe, you step out of climate agreements, and so on. But then the good news is that the new generation will build the new world. And that's what Bruno was talking about, the new social contract, the new structure. That's what's going to happen. And this fourth turning thing, geopolitical uncertainty, leads to a lot of volatility where you're talking about in markets, leads also to a political and an economical fragmentation of the world. And that's, of course, very bad for Europe, because just at the moment that we need to come together more than ever, the world environment makes that it's very difficult to do so. And if you talk about investments, that has an impact, because we can invest in the United States and you buy very big companies. Europe, indeed, you have, of course, a couple of big companies, but we have not built a new $100 billion company the last 30 years in Europe. In the United States, you do that extremely often, and that's an issue. But this being said, that's what we tell to clients today, maybe it's a good time to invest in Europe, because markets are extremely negative, especially on investors on European cyclicals. They're all priced like they're going to go bankrupt almost, and that's not the case. So we have to be realistic, but maybe markets are a little bit too negative, and maybe therein lies the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. There was a global survey done by the Financial Times, and it really struck me when I read it. They interviewed a lot of economists about productivity and the productivity gap between Europe and the States. What I was wondering is, if you see that graph, you see that it more or less until 2007, 28 goes together. And then there is that huge surge in the US. My question to you, as both being economists, is that due to a different capital market structure? Is it due to the tech boom? Is that due to, what is the reason that they diverged the way it did and the way it's still doing?
Well, the divergence started in 2008 because the digitalization started to explode around the world. But there's one secret to understand the difference between the US and Europe. The secret is that we are deductive people. We always use principles to apply them to reality, whereas Americans are inductive people. They work with trial and errors. If they fail, it means that they didn't put themselves to succeed in the right position to succeed in the first place. They will reassess the situation and hopefully success the next day. And if they success on the next day, they will even do better the day after. So induction means that you have to reassess the reality all the time. And also the other thing, and that's very important nowadays, is that they do not make a difference between fundamental research and applied research, whereas we still do that, meaning that somebody can become rich out of his own invention. And that's what's happening with Elon Musk and all these people. So they are discovering things and they are making a business out of that. Whereas in Europe, we have still a fragmented market and it's hard to become rich with an invention. And that's something that has been going on since, I would say, decades, if not centuries, because it also is linked to the religious roots. Europe is mostly Catholic, based on principles. The US is a Protestant country based on rules. It's rule-based, we are principle-based. And if you put all this together, you realize that becoming wealthy out of discovery is something that is admirable in the US, whereas it's still kind of suspect in Europe. So we have not embraced the new spirit of innovation. And I'm kind of worried because we see that with AI, we are lagging behind, of course, obviously, except, some companies in France that are quite small, to compare to the ones operating in the US.
Same question to you.
Well, there's so much in what Bruno already said, inductive people, deductive people, and so on. So we could go on for a very long time about, okay, we should probably have a unified capital market. That would help. We should have less regulation. That should help. Being able to scale up very quickly. That should help because we have smart people, we have good universities, we have capital, we have all the building blocks, but we're not able to build $100 billion companies like the US is doing at a very rapid pace. And then it indeed comes to a bit of mentality, the trial and error, being willing to fail a couple of times. If you fail in Belgium or in Europe, you're a loser. If you fail 3 times or 4 times in the US and you're successful the 5th time, you're a hero. We don't have to make all Elon Musks all the time, because maybe there is an argument against that as well. But they have superstars in Belgium, and in Europe you're not allowed to be a superstar. They say in Belgium, just behave normally. That's already bad enough. So we do not put these people on a pedestal. We cannot get rich from an invention and stuff like that. So that's that mentality. In the US, they very often say, go big or go home. Maybe we should need that mentality a little bit more, and indeed I've been reading history books. I love London, and they had capital markets for venture capital back in the 1700s and the 1600s. They even had an idea back then for a tunnel under the canal. They never did it, but they had plans for that. You could invest in companies that were making clocks to take treasures out of ships. So there was the coffee shops back then. So, and that mentality is still there, but unfortunately when a European biotech or somebody in Belgium as a startup, they go to the Nasdaq. They don't go to London, they go to Europe, and that's an issue. So it's structure that we have to build, but it's also, I think, mentality, which is even more important.
Mm-hmm. But now we know the AI race is going on. It will be vitally important for many reasons. You have 27 member states, 27 legal structures, 27 different markets. How will it be possible to get that consolidation? And my question is basically, we talked already about it before the podcast, how can we create the same dynamic as in Silicon Valley? What is needed? What are those building blocks that we needed to start this? Because I think everybody screams about it. You mentioned it. We have capital. We have smart people. What is needed?
Well, the issue is that we have multiple countries, and meaning that we have no single market. We have multiple markets, whereas in the US, they have just one market, is one continent. So we should go for a huge capitalistic consolidation in multiple sectors, like chemicals, like pharmaceuticals, like telecommunication, but nobody can force companies to get consolidated. There's no, political power that would say these 2 companies have to merge together. On the contrary, we prevented some merging because we wanted to promote a free trade, and free market economy. It was a big mistake. I think we could see a situation where the situation in Europe becomes, at some point in time, so weak that people feel they need to consolidate, they need to merge and to rebuild European giants. We are far from that, but it may happen. If we don't do that, the size of our companies will decrease day by day compared to the ones in the US. And you are mentioning AI. AI will be a big issue, multiple issue, because we are using AI capacities from American companies mostly. AI will take away probably some jobs in the first place. There will be a big issue of the sharing of productivity gains between capital and labor, meaning that labor could be hit in Europe and capital will become wealthier day by day in the US, thanks to AI. And we see that in the huge market capitalization of the big IT operators in the US, which is a sign that they will capture the productivity gains. So we have big issues, and behind what you say, social issues are to come, especially because we do not know precisely what will be the effect on AI on the job market. That is one of my biggest concerns for the new generation, because we always feel that IT hits the older people. It will happen at some point in time. But today, what we do see is that the young generation, young graduates are being hit by AI, first in the US, probably soon in Europe. So we have multiple issues. And to me, the solution converges towards capitalistic consolidation. But the trigger point has not been reached, not yet been reached.
Capitalistic consolidation.
And look in places like Spain or so on, youth unemployment is high. And it's also with the qualified people who have the degree, so that's important. The consolidation, indeed, we are not allowing it because we always say we want a free market and you have all these rules. And in principle, they're good. It's once again the principles, and we should not set aside all the principles that we have, but we have to be realistic, and we cannot... When you have a merger of two companies, and there were proposals in the past also in France and other places, and then you say, you get too big because then you get a dominant position, you will misuse your dominant position, that's all good, and then you do not allow it, but then all of a sudden you get confronted with a Chinese company or with a US company that have that size, and you're not able to fight them off. This is a global world, so there is not a vacuum in which Europe lives, that there is the reality of all these other powers. And indeed, we should try to build, I don't know how, but we should try to build not national champions, but European champions that are big enough. And like I said, we have not been able to build one company of the size of a Palantir, and we can discuss whether a Palantir is a strange company in the sense that how it's financed and the relationships with the government and so on, and whether they are overvalued and whether they will maybe fail or whatever, you don't know. But the point is you build them and you have that trial and error story that you do not have in Europe. So building national champions, we have good universities, good research. Okay, we have the division about the fundamental and the applied, and that's true. But we manage to have startups, but they do not go to our capital markets, and they go to the Nasdaq if they want to grow, and they do not scale up fast enough. And I don't know, maybe Bruno has an idea about that, but I don't know how we do that. But that's key. That's key in the story.
Imagine I give you the key. You have all the decision power to do like the very 3 first steps. What would you do? Because I think a lot of Europeans are now wondering themselves, I think everybody knows the analysis, but what can we do practically to get this going? Because people are being concerned that we are lagging behind, sorry?
And in AI, we're lagging behind. If you look at the patents, China is about 70%. Okay, a patent does not always turn into a new thing, but okay, they have the patents. If you look at money, data centers, the US is way ahead. And in both sides, Europe is nowhere. So I'm bit afraid that we're missing the AI trend.
That scares people. And the question is, how can we turn that around?
I do agree. I fully agree with Philippe. I would say that there should be a discussion between the EU commissioners and the leaders of important European companies with the idea of loosening competition constraints. And telling these people, you'll be hit at some point in time by foreign competition, you'll be overwhelmed by Chinese goods, so you need to consolidate. And that is, to me, the key solution to overcome the situation we are facing. And basically, even in Belgium, it's a tiny country, but we have, and Philippe worked for a bank, I used to work for banks as well, we have multiple banks. Isn't it too much to have 4 major banks in a small, tiny countries? Shouldn't there be a huge banking consolidation? Probably yes, because if we cannot achieve a capital market, maybe we can do that through bank mergers. And the same would be true for energy, for chemicals, as I was saying, pharmaceuticals. So there are many opportunities to be seized. But again, it's also the stance of the Commission that has to change. I think that Ursula von der Leyen starts to understand that innovation is key. But if you take a look at the Draghi report that was issued less than 2 years ago, I don't know where we are, but I think we are exactly nowhere. the implementation, because the guy gave us tools. He gave the message that hundreds of billions should be invested into innovation, into education, and we are still doing nothing about it. So basically, we are losing our time. And I think that if the Commission is not able to trigger that these huge consolidations within the next 3 years, it will be a EU Commission total failure. And Ursula von der Leyen could be then blamed for not having seized the opportunity. So we need new people. And also from a political perspective, maybe we need more strong leaders. I was always thinking that Bart de Wever would be a good EU leader, and maybe Meloni, so other people. We need to change the team.
So we need more leadership to take those decisions that are maybe not popular, But then the question is, Draghi, you mentioned him already. Draghi was really saying we need to consolidate more. We need bigger giants to fight the other giants that are not European. Now, my question is that something from a regulation point of view that needs to happen? Is that something supranational, national? How do we get there? Because it's a good analysis that Bruno is making. Draghi makes the same analysis. Philippe?
Yeah, I hear you want the solution from me. That's now I'm going to say something that I would not have said 15, 20 years ago, or when I was young or younger. Young. I'm quite old these days, and I feel old these days sometimes. But the point is, I've always been Adam Smith. I've always been free market economy, and the market will find this equilibrium somewhere. No, Adam Smith never tells you where it will find an equilibrium, so it can come at a point that's socially not very desirable. So I've learned that. Giving subsidies to companies like ASML and so on 10, 15 years ago, I said, no way, you're not going to do that. Please don't interfere. But the reality of the world is, and we're more or less back in the 19th century in that way, a lot of countries like China, but also the US, is running a very strong industrial policy. The government is interfering, and you can say everything that Donald Trump is doing with Greenland is absolutely ridiculous. He's looking commodities, maybe in a way that's not very desirable either, but the point is doing that. So somehow you should have governments, and if possible on a supranational level, if not on a national level, that work together with industry. If you look at the Critical Minerals Act, for example, well, we have one in Europe, but just like so many things, we have done nothing with it. If US wants to have any chance of getting a good trade deal with China, which is not that they buy the soybeans they were going to buy anyway, or they give back the rare earths that they were giving before, then they need access to these commodities, and that's industrial policy. If they're pushing to get chip fabs back to the US, which cost a lot of money. A couple of years ago, you would buy a chip fab for 400-500 million. Now you talk billions. So if you do not subsidize that, it's not going to happen. So I'm not calling here because that would be against all my principles for big government intervention. But Europe, I think, should think about an industrial policy, because you're faced with a China, you're faced with the US that clearly have that policy. And if you don't have it, you're like behind. So you need to somehow to integrate government, if possible on the European level, with the industry and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to survive in this world that where everybody is back in the 19th century in that sense, is back where governments are very actively intervening in everything that companies do.
So I
totally agree with Philippe, totally agree, because I was like him, I would say I was favoring free market economy, but when you see what's happening in the US, there's a convergence between what the tech giants are doing and the political power. So I fully agree with what he says. Fully.
But then the question is, you both say interventionism is more needed than ever, because we need to make these very difficult decisions that if you need unanimously, it's very difficult to take them. But at the other side, we don't have a lot of time to get there. So the question is, do we need a complete reformation of how decisions are taken on a European level and the relation from the European Union with the 27 member states? Do we need more power on the European level? How do you see this?
Difficult to say. I would say I would promote less power to the European Commission because, as it is today, because unanimity, doesn't work anymore. So there should be more power given to separate countries. But at the same time, I'm more talking about the spirit of Europe. Again, I'm asking myself, why is the Draghi report not implemented? What are the hurdles? What's happening there? And so I think that countries should be freer than before to make decisions. Unanimity rules should be cancelled. At the same time, the view towards competition and innovation should change. So we need stronger people at the EU. The EU is being governed by the Ursula von der Leyen and one commissioner per country.
We have a feeling in Europe, and once again, we should not abandon our principles, because principles is what Europe is built on, and we should not leave them because the world is complicated. But if you look, for example, at the United States, everybody is going on about Donald Trump inviting Zuckerberg and all these people in the office, and Elon Musk, and then they sit together at the table, and then you can say, yeah, that's the power, and the power is taking all the money, and that's the elite, and then you have too much difference if you look at the Gini coefficient or something like that, too much inequality, and then okay, we strive for equality, and that's a good thing. But sometimes what you see there is a government that sit around the table like we sit today with the industry and saying, basically, how are we going to dominate the world? Mm-hmm. And that's what they do. Mm-hmm. And for us, this is, no, you should not do this, and that is bad, and so on. So that doesn't have to be this extreme, but there is a middle ground. Somehow you should be able, and that comes, like what Bruno says, with strong leadership. You can say a lot about Donald Trump, and I'm not promoting Donald Trump, but he is a leader that in a way gets things done, because people are worried when he does something that they're afraid of him to a certain extent. So if you once again see what's happening with critical minerals and so on, or investments in Intel and in other companies, well, they get the economy going. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we should think about, and maybe Bruno or somebody should start a think tank. Maybe I already have one, where you put together these people, and exactly your question, and I'm turning around the hot mess because I don't have an answer. But you have to find a way, and I don't know how, to bring industry, captains of industry, different industries, different countries, leaders together, and then sit around the table. Let's make a plan. Let's try to how does the industry have to look in 5 years' time? Maybe we don't have that much time, but let's say 5 years' time. And what we're going to do, what are the measures we're going to take? And yeah, you have so much working councils and so on running around. Let's work on that, because if we don't do that, and that's what you started with, are you hopeful or fearful? I'm still hopeful that if we don't do that, we will get overrun by China, by India, by the United States, by basically everyone.
Yeah, and that's a scary message. Also for young people, we know the great history of Europe. We know how we've risen. We've been really an economical power. Industry was so important. A lot of inventions were done here. But now I think a lot of people have the feeling that it's slipping away towards other countries. So my question is also in that sense, you call all these different stakeholders. You have the European Commission, you have the member states. But monetary policy is also vitally important. Look, currently we are looking at price, at inflation. The inflation cannot be more or around 2%. But the question that I have is this: can you reconcile this with an industrial policy where we need expansions, where we need investments in those key industries that are boosting our competitiveness? Bruno, I know you've written a lot about that, about the role of a central bank, especially nowadays. What should be the role of the European Central Bank?
We have decided to create the euro, and it was a success, based on the idea that we should fight inflation. Incidentally, the ECB didn't see the inflation coming in 22. That was, to me, a big mistake. And I think that at some point in time, seeing that the US dollar is weakening day by day, it may change with the new chair of the Federal Reserve. That if we see the US dollar weakening, we cannot have a too strong currency, meaning that we should monetize part of the public debt that is already been done, but we should also maybe print money to finance new companies, new corporates, to stimulate innovation or to stimulate the green economy. That's something that is, of course, not orthodox monetary policy. But since 2008, we are in a different world. So monetizing debt is not something that is a prohibited word.
Do you think that the role of the ECB and the tasks and the KPIs that they are monitoring need to be expanded? There may be something like competitiveness that also should be on their plate to
It should, I think,
be evaluated on?
the mandate, of course, it's hard to change, but the mandate of the ECB, as Philippe mentioned, should be probably the same as the one of the Fed. And also the 2% inflation hurdle, it has to remain for credibility reasons because it has been decided maybe 30 years ago it should be like that. But practically speaking, if we have a little bit more of inflation, that's no big deal. That's no big deal. Because as Philippe was mentioning, I think that what will happen in the US is that they will probably decrease rates below the level of inflation, having negative short-term real interest rates. That's a way to dilute public debt. Of course, it creates a breakup in the way central banks should act. But definitely, I think it's the way that they react. So we should probably do the same. The worst case scenario would be to stick to the 2%, to enter into an inflated world because of the inflation starting in the US, and that we can always feel with multiple commodities and gold and silver and all these things, and then to try to fight inflation with increasing rates. The euro will become even stronger, and then again we'll be back to the situation of 2009 that was a catastrophe. So we have to loosen the inflation level, inflation constraint.
Are you believing in that European industrial renaissance, that renaissance as we call it? Are you believing that it is possible that with everything which is going on in Europe, outside of Europe, that we can get there in a short period of time and make those decisions that could foster and improve the future? Liza?
I sometimes say hope is not a strategy, but sometimes hope is all you have. So I'm a Belgian, I'm European, so I'm going to answer this yes. I think we will do it. And in our book, we talk a lot about the young wizards. We're going to do it. And I have faith in them. I have my 2 kids. I love them. They're wonderful. I see their friends. We have to do it for them to a certain extent, but in a way, they will also do it themselves. And I have absolutely conviction that they will be able to do it.
My belief is that there would be 3 conditions to reach that point. First, education. We have to re-educate ourselves all the time, especially with AI. Education will stimulate innovation with freedom, and then we have to go through a kind, as I was mentioning, of a capitalistic consolidation. If the 3 conditions are met, we can, in a couple of years, change Europe with a new, probably EU governance.
Bruno, Philippe, thank you so much for this very valuable and timely discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.